my marriage was falling apart, when my relationships with my children were falling apart, when I was in the midst of my addiction. How I was doing at work was the one thing that I held on to that was sort of the measuring stick for me as to whether my life meant anything. You've probably come across one of the many other videos on YouTube about programmer burnout, but they usually have a pretty bad ending. Well, today I want to help you by showing you how the danger of burnout from programming definitely is real, but you can actually heal. My burnout was a combination of three things. Things I did to myself, things other people did to me, and things that really were neutral. Nobody had a responsibility. They just happened in my life and they contributed to my burnout. So first, let me just share the things that I did to myself that contributed to my burnout. First of all, people pleasing. You've probably heard of this. Another term for it is approval addiction. I grew up with one parent who was a narcissist. And if you've had a narcissistic parent, usually they make most of their life about themselves. And so finding your own place in their family is often really difficult. You're often looking for them to approve of you or recognize you or notice you. And as my career moved forward, I did a lot of things wanting to please people that ultimately resulted in my burnout. And that rolls right into overextending myself at work. If a manager asked me to do something, especially earlier in my career, I would almost always say yes and never step back and really think, does this really make sense for me? Do I even have the bandwidth for it? And too many times of doing that really was one of the major contributors to my burnout. I had a couple startups that I was involved in founding, and I was working 20, 30 extra hours a week on top of a full-time job with a family. I had really high expenses. Now, that may be debatable depending on what area of the world you live, but here in Austin, Texas, the cost of living has gone up significantly in the 15 years I've lived here. And I also got used to a pretty comfortable lifestyle. I bought a lot of things that honestly I didn't really need. But even when I wouldn't buy those things, I got myself into a situation with my children, my house that I live in, my car payments, everything that I was responsible for, where because of my high expenses, that was a major contributor towards me burning out. I've talked about this many times on the channel before, but I'm a recovering marijuana addict. I was an addict for almost 25 years. And I've talked about that in one of my most popular videos on the channel. It's called Why Do So Many Programmers Lose Hope? Being a marijuana addict, it helped me cope with the job, or I thought it did, but it also caused me to escape from a lot of responsibilities in my life. And the result of all these different kind of poor decisions I made myself, which is really the first part of what I'm going to talk about with you here, is that I had a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. I wouldn't show this, of course, to people at work. And even with my family, I wouldn't often talk with them about it. But I learned through some things I'm going to share with you further on in the video that even though I was a high achiever and I was making a lot of money and it seemed externally like my life was going well, deep down inside, I felt like crap about myself. I had a lot of guilt for mistakes that I'd made in my life and some of the decisions I've made. And that was a major contributor to my burnout. So next, I'll share with you some of the things that were done to me that contributed to my burnout. And I'll be honest with you, this video makes me really uncomfortable. It's very hard to share these things, but you know, if they're going to help people, then here we go. The first thing that happened to me, that other people did to me that I think was really damaging to my life and really contributed to my burnout is I was lied to and manipulated by management many, many times over my career. I've told stories in other videos on YouTube and in my project stories that I share about some of the politics and some of the things that happen. But when you are continually depending on people to have your back and care about your career, and you go to company after company after company or project after project after project, and you continue to see people just lie and take advantage of you, it can bring you to a really dark place where you feel like you can't trust anybody. And, it's only normal, I think, that there's a period of reacting to that I went through where I really didn't trust anybody. But I also learned through recovering from my burnout that really the way I was dealing with management and the way I was dealing with the result of when I would be manipulated or lied to was, I think, even a bigger contributor to my burnout than the things being done to me in the first place. I was also put on firefighting on projects way too often in the last 3 or 4 years that I worked at a consultancy I was at before I started working for myself. I've talked with you before about how in the second half of my career, I worked for a consulting agency for 10 years. And towards the end of my time working there, they would have a problem with a project and they would put me on it to rescue it. And they just started doing this over and over and over again. And even though after a while I told them, look, I'm not going to keep doing this, I let them keep doing it. I looked at it at that time before I healed from my burnout as that it was their fault. But I've realized since I could have pulled myself out of that situation by quitting that job, or at least threatening to quit at any time. So being put on those projects over and over again really burnt me out because I was constantly, basically fixing other people's mistakes and trying to right other people's messes. And I was pretty successful at it, but to the detriment of my health, my well-being, my family, and ultimately was a big contributor to my burnout. I was also, unfortunately, betrayed by a coworker who was a friend of mine. I had a very close relationship with a coworker where we tried to do something together, and we are on good terms now. And I definitely had some things I was doing that contributed to why we split and things didn't go well. But I also really feel like this person was disingenuous in that they took things that I was working to accomplish over my time at this company, and they kind of co-opted it and made it their own. I feel like that's not how you treat a friend. If it's purely a coworker and they're not a real friend, I think, competing with each other at work, it's only natural. But this is someone who I had many times spent time with outside of work. I thought that they were a closer friend than they were. I've seen comments on many of my other videos that people talk about don't ever trust a coworker with anything. I'm not that jaded about it. But yes, when you're betrayed by someone that you trust, it can really hurt. And I think that was a contributor to my burnout. And finally, let me share with you some of the things that were going on in my life that really were not my fault. I don't think they weren't the fault of other people doing things to me. They were just things that came into my life and made it really difficult. The reason I share these with you, by the way, is if you're on the edge of burnout, or you are burning out, or you think you're going to burn out, you might want to look at the things going on in your life, even if they're they don't feel like they're the direct contributors, because at least for me, these were a big part of why I burned out. The first one is one of my children, I have 3 children, became addicted to very hard drugs. Even me being a marijuana addict for close to 25 years, I had never experienced having someone close to me who struggled with a really serious, dangerous, deadly addiction, where other people are literally dying in this person's life who are friends with them because of how dangerous the drugs are. When that started to happen in my life, continuing to work and be in leadership positions and try to train people and have a positive attitude and, put on a strong, good face in front of clients became really difficult. And I could do it, but it was just tearing me up. And so, a big factor, one of many that I'm sharing with you that contributed to my burnout was, having someone that I really love fall into a really dangerous pattern in their life and, spending a lot of money trying to do a lot of things to help them get out of it. And, knowing too that me being an addict, I had a part in kind of exposing them to that world of addiction, even if I didn't, cause it fully. And I've learned over the years through my own kind of healing that I wasn't completely to blame. I wasn't completely innocent in it either. Also, I've shared with you how my father died when I was 24. At the time he passed away, and I've made a video about the whole story of the project when that happened, I was not ready to grieve him. I was still an addict. I was on a very political, difficult project where there were just crazy political things happening to me. It was my first software project, really, and I wasn't ready, and I was very naive. But, losing my father when I was 24, he was 51 years old, that was something that kind of hung over my head for 15, 20 years. And I had moments of some grief here and there, but I never fully processed it. When 9/11 happened, that was 5 years into my career. I saw the corporate culture in America drastically change. It went from companies being really excited to innovate and, being willing to take some risks. And there was just an attitude of innovation and creativity, at least at the company I worked for at the time. It was a kind of Fortune 500. Once 9/11 happened, the budgets got tight, management got paranoid, things had to be approved a lot more. The software development processes got a lot more rigid. And I think, working post 9/11 really contributed to my burnout. Now, I'll say my burnout started before COVID, but, if you're someone who's, let's say, maybe a little younger than I am, COVID, let's say, may have been a similar event for you as to what I experienced when 9/11 went down, and that, you were working and you saw, let's say, the general software development market, or the way people treated each other, and the way the hiring process was, and sort of like the outlook on the industry, look one way prior to COVID. And then afterwards, we're all in it now. We're seeing there's a lot of silliness going on and a lot of people, freaking out because of AI. And I'll talk about that more in future videos. And lastly, another really big thing that affected my life that, I have a hard time talking about, mostly because I really feel bad for her even to this day, even though she's healed a lot, is, I found 18 years into my marriage that my wife had been sexually abused. And I don't know if you know somebody who's gone through this, or maybe it's even happened to you, but, it was extremely distressing to me, to say the least. I didn't know what I could do to help her. I felt pretty helpless. I would try and offer so many things to try to help her figure out how to heal and how to get the, apology from the person who did it to her. And I found I really had my hands tied. She's got a podcast, actually. It's called The Past Repainted. I'll put a link in the description to it if you want to check it out. But she talks about on there, our relationship and much of the same things you've heard me talk about, but from my wife's perspective, including my burnout. But, finding out my wife had gone through that was just really, really difficult and sad. And I think, for the 7-8 years after that, continuing to try to work while this stuff was going on with one of my children, it was just, it was too much, and it contributed to the burnout. So let me talk about how my burnout started. How did I know, this is getting bad? Well, first, a partner of mine in a startup I was trying to do on the side, I just talked with you about this, exited the startup. So my co-founder decided that they just didn't have the bandwidth, and it basically crumbled something we had been working on for 2 years. And I think when that happened, I started to get some anger and frustration inside about the decision that I'd even made to try to create that startup in the first place, because I knew I had sacrificed a lot of time I could have spent with my family, with my kids. I'd also passed up various promotions that were offered to me at work because I knew I was working on this startup on the side. I was upset with the person, but I was also really upset with myself. Also, my wife just kind of began distancing herself from me. It had been several years, 4 or 5 years since I found out about the abuse. And though I tried to help her and she'd went to therapy and she tried a lot of different things to heal, our marriage was getting worse. We were both still addicts. She'll talk about on her podcast, if you listen to it, we were both addicts, not just me. Our closeness began to kind of wane, and she was kind of doing things in her life on her own, and I was doing things in my life on my own. And I think that feeling of drifting apart from my wife, and even, in some really bad arguments we had, divorce started getting thrown around. That was, part of the downward fall into my burnout. The child that I shared with you was going through trying to get free from really hard drugs, was just continuing to struggle with relapse. Would be clean for 3 months, would relapse, and all kinds of bad stuff would happen. Would be clean for another 6 months, would relapse, and all kinds of really bad stuff would happen. And every time this would happen, it would, directly affect my life and just kind of interrupt anything that I was trying to do at work, in my relationships. And, that continuing to go on in the middle of all this other stuff, I felt like something bad was going to happen. And I think the final, straw that broke the camel's back, or as they say, was the company that I'd worked for almost 10 years got bought out by another company that clearly just, said all the right things in the acquisition, that they cared about the company culture, but really didn't. And the direction that the company started to go in was the polar opposite in some ways of where I was trying to head in my career, and where I felt like I could be the most effective. And so once that happened, over about a 6 to 8 month period after that, I found myself more and more frustrated with, I was trying to keep working there and just kind of put up with things I didn't like, because I had all this other personal stuff going on, with the hope that, I could just kind of tune out things that I didn't like, collect a paycheck, do the best job I could until I got through all this other stuff. And unfortunately, that never happened. The job got worse, and these personal issues continued to accelerate in their kind of difficulty in my life. So what happened when the burnout actually hit, when I knew, ooh, I am burning out hard? Well, the first thing that happened was I couldn't sleep. I got hit with, and I've talked about this earlier on the channel, the worst insomnia. I had one night where I just went to bed and I woke up after 2 hours. And after that, I just couldn't get back to sleep. And I couldn't figure out why. And I laid there. I didn't feel like I was stressed. I didn't feel like I was thinking about anything negative. I just didn't know what was going on. But it's like my body would just not shut off and let me sleep. And the next day, I couldn't even fall asleep that next day when I was already tired. And I finally fell asleep, but then I woke up after 3 hours and had the same thing happen. And I had this happen for like a week straight, 5 or 6 days, to the point that I checked myself into the emergency room. And then they had this giant bill and this disclaimer they put in front of me. And I realized I couldn't, deal with this huge bill. So I kind of got out of there. I went through sleep studies. I started sleeping in this room, actually, the room that I'm videoing in right now. I had one of those air mattresses to just try to give my wife some peace, because I'd be getting up in the middle of the night and I'd be, tossing and turning and stressing, and she couldn't sleep. And so, that insomnia continued off and on for 3 or 4 years, well into the YouTube channel too. When I've been making these videos, it was never that acute, like where every single day I was having that bad of sleep, but 3 or 4 days a week for the first 2 years, I would not sleep more than 2 or 3 hours. And, it was extremely destructive to me. I'll maybe make a whole video eventually about some of the things that I did to recover from insomnia, but a lot of them had to do with psychological things and spiritual things that I'm going to get into with you in just a moment. But what that insomnia started to lead to happening, which really created the first kind of significant event in my burnout, is I started swearing, like Tourette's level swearing, in the middle of calls with clients. Now, I was muted, but, I was on a new project. I'm sleeping in, on an air mattress in here. I'm trying to log into Azure and doing all this cloud architecture stuff. And I just would lose it. I had no patience with the client. I didn't care about their problems anymore. I was pissed off about my life and everything else. It was like work didn't matter. And I just shared with you all the stuff I was going through and all these things that had happened. it just all came to a head to a point where like I took some sick time and I took some of my vacation time and I thought I'd just come back. First I took a week off and then I tried to work a day and I just couldn't. I was mad. And then I took another half week off and basically I took all my sick time and, spent all my vacation and I had to resign. I wrote a letter to the general manager of the company I worked for at the time and just said, I'm really sorry, but I'm still having health problems and I don't see in the foreseeable future how I'm going to be able to come back and work for you anymore. And I said, I really appreciate all the years that I've been able to work there and your support for me, but I just can't do this anymore. And I resigned. So what happened after that was incredibly difficult. And I've never really shared this on YouTube before. But, the first thing that happened was because I couldn't sleep, I ended up spending all my emergency savings. One of the things they often tell you is, save a certain amount of money on top of investments or whatever else you have as kind of like an emergency buffer where if you lose your job, you've got that there for you. And I had an emergency savings, buffer. And over a period of about 6 months, I spent all that money on just expenses, my mortgage, my kids' food, bills, just typical stuff. I wasn't going out there blowing cash. It was just, I had a pop tire, things come up, right? But basically blew through my emergency savings. Unfortunately, I got a very short part-time consulting contract through my existing employer that was like a month long, and it floated me a little bit of cash, and I was able to do it remotely. And I knew that client, and it wasn't very stressful because it was something I'd already worked on there. I'd built the whole app. It was a little iPad app. But soon after that, I spent the money I'd made there, and then I spent all my just regular savings and then my regular checking. And then I got another contract that I worked for a company. Oh my gosh, I don't even want to go into this one. It was so messed up. I talked about it in another video. But, I made a bunch of money there, probably about half a year's salary. But then for the next year and a half, the burnout got worse. And I actually had to sell all my stock. I had a bunch of Microsoft stock, a bunch of Apple stock. I couldn't pay any of my bills. I couldn't keep my house. I couldn't feed my children. So I had to liquidate my stocks and I had to sell all my retirement eventually. Took a huge hit percentage-wise on some of that. And then really the darkest spot was I started falling behind on my mortgage. And I got to this point where, I was just completely burned out. I couldn't work. Just the thought of working made me so angry. And I just, I had all these problems in my life. And that's what really led me to what started to help me heal, which is what I'm going to share with you here that I hope will actually give you some hope if you're in the middle of burnout or on your way to burnout or, worried that you're going to burn out. I really wish I could tell you that recovering from burnout is some top 10 list, and if you just follow those steps, you'll recover. But the reality is, I had to struggle for a while. I wanted to quit doing software development at first. I was going down to the Wildflower Center, which is a place near us that has all these native Texan plants and flowers and trees. It's beautiful. And my wife would go down, and I would go down there, and we would walk around, and I would just rack my brain. What am I going to do? How am I going to get out of this debt? How am I going to get back on my feet again? How am I going to work in software anymore when I'm this angry and this frustrated? And at the time, my daughter was going to a karate dojo near here. And this karate dojo was kind of ran by a bunch of different women who had all gone through difficult circumstances in their life. And my wife was going there for karate too. And so they had this really cool community where, a lot of them had all experienced a lot of the same trauma. But my wife got to this point, with her abuse where she realized, I've been going to this dojo and I have this close relationship with all these other women, but all they ever do is kind of complain. And yeah, that happened to me too. And yeah, that sucks. And, men suck. And it was just this negative. It was like you felt camaraderie, but it was a whole, misery loves company situation. And so there was this woman who sent her kids there, and everybody at the dojo apparently knew that she was a Christian. And so one day she just walked up to her and was like, hey, I'm probably the most skeptical person you'll ever meet about God and things like that. But basically my life's falling apart. What should I do? Would you talk to me about, what's involved in Christianity or whatever? And my wife, she went to Catholic school when she was a kid. She'd rejected her faith when she was a teenager. So our entire marriage, she was not open to any kind of faith or anything like that. But basically this woman was like, yeah, come to my house and read the Bible. So she starts going to her house, reading the Bible with her. And I don't know any of this. And then one day she tells me, hey, would you want to go to church with me? And I was like, what? And so she invited me to go to this church that she found here in Austin. And at first I was resistant because I was just a mess burnout wise. And I didn't want to be even in public. To be honest, I was so charred, but I went with her and it was really hard. The sermon that day was about kind of reconciling with God or just basically like coming back to God, which was kind of exactly what was going on in my life at the time or in that moment almost. And so that kind of started at least the process of me finding my faith. I've talked with you about this on the channel before and I'm not trying to, again, with any of these videos, cram my faith down your throat. I need to be very honest about how important my faith is to me and how much it helped me with burnout, because it is a significant, big portion of it. And I feel like I would be dishonest if I try to gloss over that and pretend that that wasn't a serious part of it. It is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but there's a variety of things that happened that helped me recover from my burnout. But I need to at least talk some about this. Well, my child, who had the serious drug addiction problems, moved out, not because we were all happy about it, but they moved out in the middle of a relapse and in a situation where we had told them over and over again that if, this didn't get any better, we couldn't have them living here anymore. And, after several times of that, they eventually moved out into a situation that wasn't much better. But that child of mine not being in the house anymore, even though I was really distraught when they left, it started to finally give us as a family, me and the other two children of mine that were still here, some breathing room, because we didn't have this really scary, addiction and the ups and downs of it going on, and affecting the whole household all the time. And that, I think that began the process of healing a little bit. And around that time is right when I started this YouTube channel. I started this YouTube channel not knowing really why I was doing it. If you watch some of my first videos, I'm kind of a little confused. Am I talking to product managers and helping them with their company? Am I talking to people about how to do DevOps better? Am I talking to other programmers about their kind of, life and career problems? It was kind of all the above. But I didn't really know what the purpose of the channel was, what I even really hoped to achieve. I just felt like I needed to get off my chest in a cathartic kind of way some of the crap I'd been through in my career and in my life. And I just thought, I don't know, maybe there's some other people out there who will benefit from this. And obviously they do, because I have this channel now, but this was a very rocky ride to get to this channel being, 100,000 subscribers where it sits now. I think though, going on YouTube and starting to talk about the mistakes I'd made in my career and the really difficult projects I'd been on and the things I'd learned, this has been a really big part of me healing from my burnout. So I do want to say thank you if you're watching this. You watching these videos and having an interest in them and, giving me the ability and the courage to do some of the things I'm doing right now is actually helping me heal from burnout. Believe it or not. And I'm not just, gaslighting you. It really helps me. And that leads right into the next thing that started to happen to pull me out of my burnout was I started coaching developers. I've talked about this. I did it for free at first. Then I started charging. I had to change my pricing a couple of times. But meeting other developers online to coach them, the thing that surprised me and that really helped me with my burnout was hearing other people and their struggles and their suffering. I think when you're always in your own head and you're always thinking about your own problems, you're so kind of obsessed with the day-to-day of how you're feeling that in some ways you can never kind of crawl out of it. And I think when I started talking to other developers and hearing their project situations and hearing how their, manager maybe was treating them poorly, and not always, again, people think all these videos are negative. if that's how you want to take it, hey, I can't change it. But I really just try to be honest with people about the true state of the industry and what's going on. It's not all bad, but there's some difficult crap. And I hear it from people in coaching pretty often. They're not going to come to me if they're like, my job's great and everything's going rosy. Would you coach me? They usually come to me because they're like, this is really effed up and I need help. But, hearing from these other developers, product managers, again, people in all kinds of positions, how the dynamics at the company or the decisions they've made in their life or their personal life, struggles and burnout has affected them really started to heal me, really started to get me out of my own head and have more empathy for what other people are going through. And honestly, if you're watching this channel and you like this content, a big thing that motivates me to continue to create this content is seeing what a big need there is in the industry for people to really show some concern and some care for what we're all going through. I know life's hard and this industry is dominated by men, and I've coached plenty of women too, but women and men, we try to be strong for our job. We try to stick up for ourselves and fight through it and make money. But at the end of the day, we've all got limits. I hit them and it was pretty disastrous, as I've shared with you. But really, my sleep didn't start to get better ultimately until all these other things started to happen. Finding God and finding Jesus again. My wife and I, our relationship started getting better. I went on YouTube. I started to finally get some feedback after about 2 years from people that yes, we are experiencing this. Yes, you're not alone, as in me. I started coaching people. My child had moved out. All these things kind of started to happen and started to slowly improve my ability to sleep. I still wasn't getting 7-8 hours of sleep a night. I was still, 6 hours was a good night, if I'm honest. And, if you see how I look sometimes with my, I got really baggy eyes and stuff. I mean, believe me, I see it every day. A lot of this is the insomnia that I dealt with. When you don't sleep well for a 4 to 5 year period and you're constantly struggling with a lot of stress, it will mess up your health. So, let me just encourage you, if you feel yourself on the way to sleep problems or you're maybe in the middle of it, do whatever you can in your personal life to make some impact on the problems and try to get yourself out of them or get some help. But ultimately, I did recover, meaning, my health's not perfect, and I still do have bad nights of sleep once a week, once every 2 weeks. But, recovery is a daily thing. This is what I've learned. Recovering from burnout and serious problems in your life and addictions are not something that just is a one-time activity. It takes diligence. You got to be patient. You got to get the support that you need, and you got to be patient with yourself. And one of the things that really helped me, I've talked about this in my video, my recovery from programmer anger, is I went through really the equivalent of like a 12-step program. Alcoholics Anonymous will have this, but it was kind of a faith-based one at my church. It's about 4 months long. During that, I got to be in a room with a bunch of other men that were also going through really difficult things in their life. They weren't all addicts. They had a wide variety of problems. But once I started to really get some help and really realize, why I was broken and what was screwed up in my life, that recovery program was probably one of the turning points in my life. And a big part of that was, I had to admit that I finally, could say I wasn't in control of my life. My life had gotten completely out of control from my job, my marriage, my addiction, my influence over my children and their struggles, my financial situation. I just couldn't do it. And I was ready to admit it. And I think that's the place where I've learned we all have to get to if we're really going to get better, if we're struggling in our life or in work, or we're burned out like I was. You have to get to a place where you finally know, I can't do this. I need help. I've been trying to do it myself for decades or years, and, it's just killing me. It's just wrecking me. It's wrecking everyone around me. When I finally got to that point, that's when the healing started. And so I started reading the Bible. That's when I'd found my faith. And, I started meeting with other Christians, and they would just remind me suffering is part of life. Like, meaning you don't have to go around and just be nihilistic and bitch and say, life's screwed and this sucks and this sucks. I mean, that's easy to do. You can doom scroll all you want. But at the end of the day, suffering is part of life, and to look at it differently. And so I started to get motivated differently in my personal work. When I started to coach people, when I started putting videos out on YouTube, rather than doing them from a place of, I got to do this thing to make money, and maybe it'll also be helpful to the company or other people, I started to switch it to the first priority that I'm going to put in my mind. And the way I'm going to try to approach it first is, what would help people most? And if I approach it that way, then if it's successful, or if it makes me some kind of money, or whatever it does, it'll be coming from a place that's authentic, in a place that's not driven by money, but that's driven by wanting to actually help people. And, if I'm honest, and as much as I hate to admit this, most jobs in my life, other than maybe the first one I had, almost every decision I made was based on what's going to make me more money, what's going to make me more successful. I would do things for the customer or my client or my coworkers, but it was always secondary to, is this going to put me in a position to make more money? Is this going to help me be more successful? I know there's a lot of pressure to work that way, and you may have gotten to a point in your career working that way that's helped you be somewhat successful. But let me just warn you, at some point, you're going to really find out what matters in your life. And if you're anything like me, I just learned that life is a lot more meaningful. Getting up every day feels less empty when you go to work and you think, let's say you're on a software project. How can I help the people around me first? And then you just have the faith that if you do a good job with that, you'll get rewarded. Now, will that get you a promotion as quickly, or recognized as quickly, if you play political games and you throw other coworkers under the bus? It may not, but now you get to walk around with that guilt. And don't underestimate that guilt. A lot of the people you work with, if you see them playing dirty tricks to get ahead, they will pay the price someday. You may not see them pay that price, but they all pay the price for that. So, if you want to work in a way where you're free from feeling like the political difficult aspects that you run into on projects are, constantly something on your mind, I've just had to learn that, I have to put all that stuff last, and I have to put, the purpose of my work first. And one of the men who kind of was a mentor of mine when I was going through my addiction recovery asked me to do is, he's like, well, why don't you start tithing 10% of your income to the church? And at first I was like, dude, I've been broke. I'm barely, making enough month to month. I'm kind of coming out of it, but I have no retirement. I have no emergency fund. I have no, stocks and bonds. All these things that I had before are all gone. And now I'm supposed to give 10% of what I make, to the church. And, he really challenged me and said, well, you have to decide if you think this believing in God thing is just an intellectual exercise, or if you really believe. If you really believe in God, and you believe that he loves you and cares about you and wants to see you flourish in your life, giving some money to the church as just a way of showing, I trust that I don't have to hold on to all my money and have all this tension around it and be worried. And, if I got to spend 10% less month to month on things, making whatever changes necessary to do that, he was like, that's something that will break you free of this fear of being provided for. Because you got to imagine, at that time, I was really scared about having enough money for my family. And I've been doing that now for almost 3 years. And it's really been amazing. I'd love to tell you that since doing that, I've made way more money and all this stuff. Again, that'd be BS. It's BS. And also, I hope you're getting my point with this video and all my videos is I'm not here to try to make you rich. I'm not here to try to make you, the smartest programmer and everybody look up to you. I'm here to help you be healthy about this industry and about your job. And a big part of that, I think, is if you find a way to spend some of your money in a way that benefits people other than yourselves, and I'm not trying to tell you what to do, I'm just saying how I did it, it really can change your relationship with work in a way where, I'll be honest with you, I still worry about money sometimes, but I'm not nearly as worried because I really put my faith in my case, the Lord, to provide for me, not just my ability to do the work. And then the other thing is, I've been sober now for almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years in March. I really got sober about 6 years ago. I had one slip up the first year, so I don't count it. But, after you've been sober for almost 5 years, you have to learn a lot of new ways of coping with things in life. When stress used to happen, I had a lot of things I would run to that just don't work anymore. And once you start to learn some of those new coping mechanisms and strategies, life does start to get a little bit easier. At work, the other thing I do when I make these videos, when I coach people, if I'm on a contract, I try to put pleasing God above other people. I know this will seem like an abstract concept if you don't believe in God, and that's okay. You don't have to watch this video. But if I put my faith in like that this manager is going to reward me or this client's going to appreciate me, I can't control that. I may do the best job ever and they don't give a crap. What am I going to do then? Just stew around and bitch? That's what I used to do. It's much better. I'm like, Lord, I'm going to do a good job regardless. And if I get rewarded, great. If I don't get rewarded, fine. You've got some other purpose for me. I focus almost exclusively whenever I can now on the good things in my life. I try to protect myself from negative crap on social media. I post on Twitter, but I honestly don't read it a lot because it's just not good for me. And, I try to just accept that part of life and growing is suffering. I'm going to have times where I don't make as much money. In my future, I can't guarantee I'm not going to get sick, and have something happen and I'll go broke or lose my house, right? I can't guarantee any of those things. But I also can't guarantee that better things aren't in store for me in the future. And, this whole process of going on YouTube and meeting so many people and coaching people and getting all the feedback that you all give me in the comments, that's not something that I force to happen. There's no guarantee that when you put a video out there, people are going to give a crap. There's no guarantee anytime I share anything that anybody's going to benefit from it or talk to me. And finally, the last thing that, I continue to try to put first is to not put my personal value, who I am as a human being, in my work and the money I make. I'll be honest, when my marriage was falling apart, when my relationships with my children were falling apart, when I was in the midst of my addiction, how I was doing at work was the one thing that I held on to that was sort of the measuring stick for me as to whether my life meant anything. And when that all fell apart, I started to find what really mattered in my life and who really cared about me. And I found very few people that I thought cared about me actually cared about me. My wife was the number one person that I found, even though our marriage was, I thought, falling apart. When we really got sober and we went through a lot of our problems, I found she was probably the biggest person in my life who really did care about me, even when I was down. My mom also, I found, even though we've had a very contentious relationship over the years, was one of the people in my life that really kind of tried to lift me up when I was falling apart there for a while. So I know this video is long and it's been kind of uncomfortable to make, if I'm really honest with you, but I just want to encourage you that, when you're watching these videos from me, yes, I'm trying to help people. Yes, I'm trying to build a business. Yes, I'd like to get my videos viewed. But what I'm not trying to do is clickbait people into watching videos just to get views or, shove a bunch of my ideology down your throat so that you think like I've got all the answers. I know I have a lot of experience. I know that, my heart is in a place. I hope that I can help you. But as much as I can be doing as a human, I'm flawed, right? I have needs. I make mistakes still to this day. I do stupid shit. My heart, I'm trying to keep it in a place the best I can. I pray about this all the time to have these videos really be of true value to you. And they're not just some trendy, about the latest new programming fad that's come out that's going to get, 500,000 views. But then in a year from now, nobody's going to give a crap because, the tides have changed. I'm trying to make things for you that are timeless and that, hopefully 5-10 years from now, at least a significant portion of the videos I've made will still be pertinent and practical to you. And so thanks for watching this. If you have any personal experiences with burnout, if you got anything you're struggling with yourself that you want to share, if you've recovered from burnout, you got tips for other people. If you see yourself in danger of burnout, you want to share what's going on, maybe get some help from me and other people, leave me some comments. But until next time, thanks.